One of the key victories that Grischuk had on his way to winning the 2015 World Blitz Chess Championship was his win as black over one Boris Gelfand. The game started out with d4, e6. We think we might have a really solid kind of traditional queen's pawn game, but no. b6 and then e4 with this f5 idea immediately mixes things up into what will surely be a tactical melee. Takes f5 does allow ideas on g2, but white has queen h5 coming, so that's not really in black's ideas. He plays bishop e4 check, taking away white's right to castle, and then develops the knight. Gelfand thought about it for a little bit, as you can see here, but eventually decided it was in his best interest to develop the king side as quickly as possible with knight f3. After castles, you can already see the potentials of this attack in the making, with the rook and bishop meeting over here for a long-distance relationship. Kicking the bishop is never a bad idea if white can expand on the queen side, but if you're forcing the bishop back to a position where it's useful long-term, it may not be the best thing you've ever done. Grischuk played queen to e8, and once again we saw Gelfand go into a little bit of a think, not quite sure how to deal with his king in the center and where his plan needs to be. He commits to the king side with h4, which I think is kind of the beginning of where this game gets really messy. One of the problems here for white is that even though you're up a pawn in the current position, with the king in the center, it's not just that the king may come under attack, but it represents potential dysfunction between all of your pieces when you don't have that back rank communication between the rooks. So if Gelfand is committed to the king side, he better make sure he delivers on something that improves his position. Otherwise, he may find that over time, his pieces aren't all working together. Grischuk plays the move knight to c6, decides that developing the knight, even though it blocks this bishop temporarily, makes the most sense. The knight needs to join the king side if black's going to get a successful attack against the king. Bishop to g5. Gelfand knows he needs to complete his development. These are pretty natural moves, but what was the beginning mess of this position is now kind of in a calm before the final storm. Both sides are getting the pieces into the game, but don't underestimate that the real issue will come over to the king side again because white has this king on f1. Grischuk plays queen h5. Not immediately threatening anything, but putting the queen in a very powerful position. Obviously, you have pressure on this diagonal. There's, again, the potential that the bishop, rook, and queen might all get involved over here for tactics. This pawn is sort of pinned, right? If it moves, it starts to open up more pieces for black. So Gelfand played rook to h3 to over-defend that knight, and who knows, maybe he has ideas of bringing the rook over, but Grischuk quickly brings the other rook into the game. You can start to see that the king has almost castled by hand, but at the expense of this rook having to commit to h3. Now, if you can make this rook work on the third rank for some sort of counterplay, then great, but the chances of that happening aren't very high when all of black's pieces are actually working together toward a common goal, which is that they're all facing the king side. The bishops are facing the king side, the knight and the queens are facing the king side. So let's see, after a couple more moves here, knight to b5 was played by Gelfand. This move is a good move because this bishop is a potentially useful attacker, but it also removes the knight out of the center, and Grischuk decides to play on that dynamic tension. Rather than defending by retreating, he defends by attacking, returning the favor and putting some pressure on white's dark square bishop. The exchange, at first, when I first saw the game, I was pretty sure it must favor white to get rid of that bishop, but actually the problem is as we already highlighted earlier, we're zooming in now and you can see that focusing on the dysfunctionally placed rook on h3, yes, that's proper English. If black can just get the pieces coordinated for counterplay, white is not going to have all of his pieces working together, whereas black's has a better potential that could happen. He plays knight e7. Gelfand is getting under a little bit more time pressure here, as you can see, with 1 minute and 32 seconds. He's trying to find out how he wants to deal with this bishop. The bishop is poisoned as long as there's a tempo on the queen, but if that changes, he has to make sure he either retreats the bishop or trades, so he's got to be aware of those tactics. Bishop to e2, I think was a good move by Gelfand. It defends f3, but of course the main point is that it immediately threatens to get a discovered attack that might even trap the queen. So Grischuk says, no thank you, I appreciate my first lady, I'm going to bring her to safety. And if the smoke all clears and white again is able to deal with the rook on h3 being out of play, then the thing that happened in the beginning of this game, which is that white won a pawn with e takes f5, would hopefully come to pay dividends for white. White's goal is very simple. He wants to simplify the pressure and hopefully coordinate his pieces in time to flex the muscles of his extra pawn. But despite the fact that it's been a little bit messy for the last few moves, you can start to see the makings of what I've been talking about. Black's pieces are just better coordinated here. They're bringing more pressure to the king side, and Grischuk knows he needs to capitalize on that by playing e5. There's an immediate threat behind e5. If you want to pause the video to see it, you can. Of course, that's e4, attacking the knight, which would open the f2 pawn. And now you can see, combining the practical pressure of Grischuk's opening with the fact that it's a blitz tournament, right? This isn't a position where both sides have hours to figure out the complications. You start to see Grischuk's approach coming to pay off here. Gelfand's under a lot more pressure. The threat of e4 is a really annoying one. And again, he's getting under time pressure, already being down to about 30 seconds left. d5 makes sense in the sense that it keeps the bishop out, so that queen takes f2 won't be mate. But it doesn't prevent black from breaking through with the tactical threat we already highlighted. And now you can already see that if you've won back your pawn, then you really can't be upset with black's position at all, because we already know he's been dealing with a little bit of more of a full deck than white, right? Pieces are much more fully coordinated. Rook h2 is never a good sign. Anytime you have a rook in front of the king, that's a sign of bad things to come. Hashtag pro tip. Knight comes into f5. At first I didn't like this move. Seemed to simplify the fact that white's position was really dysfunctional. Why trade the piece? But I think that Grischuk already sensed that the simplification of the position is now favoring him, because he's no longer down a pawn. His pieces are coordinated, and he's actually the first one with a pass pawn. So he goes for this idea, inviting a little bit of a simplification. Now if he can get the queens off the board and the rooks to the open files before this rook gets itself in a better position, he's again going to have a better endgame. Grischuk is really playing on keeping the initiative going as long as white's pieces are not coordinated well. The queen comes to g5, and after rook to g1, Gelfand is going to hope to defend, but I think that with more pieces coming and the potential power of this passed pawn, Gelfand really was faced with an uphill task here. Brings the queen back. Now all of a sudden black is up a pawn for the first time in the game. A small amount of material has been won. Gelfand kind of hits the panic button and trades queens, but okay. If you have to trade queens because your king is actually the one in more danger, but all you're doing is trading queens into an endgame where you're down a pawn, then certainly something has gone wrong. And Grischuk calculates out the best way to simplify the position. He's thinking right now, do I want to take on e2 and grab the c4 pawn, or do I want to go after the g6 pawn? He's trying to evaluate how he wants the rest of this endgame to go, very smartly using his time. We talk about strong players. They don't take their time, they manage their time, sensing the critical moments and knowing when they need to think before the final and ultimate blitzing out of the moves. So he decides that taking e2 was the best, and that in the end, he thinks that the best way to go after the endgame is actually not to take the c-pawn, but to eliminate the defense of the g-pawn by force with this series of checks and trades. After trading on g1, you'll see that the g6 pawn being a weakness is going to lead to two connected pass pawns for black, which Grischuk, I believe, correctly evaluated as the easiest and fastest way to win the endgame. Note that trading into the king and pawn ending loses for white because black already has this protected pass h-pawn. Because of that, Gelfand's hands were sort of tied. He desperately tries to create counterplay here with this c5 pawn sack. If a miscalculation had been had, then it might have been enough to create counterplay. Sorry, backing up just for a moment. But a miscalculation was not going to be had by Grischuk. He takes everything and knows that he should be able to grab all of white's pawns on the way to an easily winning rook ending. If that g-pawn falls without white getting the c-pawn, then white's last chances will be gone. Rook to d4 check. Notice that Gelfand is really just living off the increment for the last several moves. Improving the rook to a safe square with tempo, that's just good technique, right? Every Russian schoolboy knows get your pieces protected, and that'll be good enough to take it home. So in summary, Grischuk wins a huge game as black over Gelfand, a very good blitz player. And this was one stepping stone on Grischuk's ultimately his road to victory in winning the 2015 World Blitz Chess Championship. We hope you enjoyed it.